My name is Rose. I am 65 years old, born and raised in Ohio, and I never thought my life would turn into the kind of story people whisper about in shock. For most of my years, I believed in family, kindness, and trust. But all of that was tested the day my daughter-in-law, Evelyn, called my recipe box junk and threw it away like it was nothing but trash. That box held decades of handwritten recipes, each one marked with my careful notes, stains of sauce, and smudges of flour. But inside it, hidden between the folded index cards, was something no one knew about except me, my secret sauce formula. I had created that sauce when I was just a young woman, working in my little kitchen while raising Paul, my only son. Over the years, neighbors, friends, even strangers begged me for the recipe. I always smiled, laughed, and said, "It's just a little of this and a little of that." But the truth was, it was something unique, something I'd guarded my whole life. So imagine Evelyn's smug face when she tossed it into a black trash bag right after my husband's funeral, her voice sharp and cruel. No one needs this worthless pile of recipes anymore. Junk, all of it. She didn't know, of course. She couldn't have. But months later, when McDonald's came sniffing around, ready to pay $2 million for the exact formula she had trashed, her face turned white as if she'd seen a ghost. And that moment, that look, was only the beginning. Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Let me know where you are watching from. You don't know, you might be lucky to get a shout out on our next video. And please, don't forget to like this story and subscribe to the channel if you love stories like this. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because before Evelyn's cruel betrayal and that shocking phone call from McDonald's, there was love, heartbreak, and the kind of lessons you only learn when the people closest to you cut the deepest. When I was a young woman, I never dreamed of riches or power. I only dreamed of a warm home, filled with laughter and the smell of food. Cooking was how I showed love. I didn't have much money, but I could take cheap cuts of meat and make them melt in your mouth. I could turn simple tomatoes into something rich and comforting. I could take flour, water, and a little yeast and create bread that brought neighbors knocking on my door. Paul, my son, grew up with that smell. He was a sweet boy once, full of curiosity. He used to sit on the counter while I stirred pots, asking me, "Mama, how do you make it taste like that?" I'd smile and hand him a wooden spoon, letting him taste and guess. He grew up eating the sauce that would later make corporate men in suits lose their minds. But life has a cruel way of changing people. When Paul met Evelyn, I was cautious. She was beautiful, sharp, and always dressed like she was heading to a photo shoot. But there was something cold in her eyes, like she was always calculating, always measuring what she could gain. I didn't want to judge too quickly, so I kept my thoughts quiet. Love is blind, and Paul was clearly smitten. I wanted him happy. But after they married, small things began to change. Evelyn thought my house smelled old, and my cooking was greasy. She complained when Paul spent too much time with me, rolling her eyes when he'd ask me about recipes. She laughed once when she found me writing down new sauce experiments. Who even writes recipes by hand anymore? That's so outdated. Still, I kept my patience. Families require compromise, I told myself. I didn't want to be the kind of mother-in-law who drove a wedge between her son and his wife. So, I kept cooking quietly, kept smiling, and kept slipping my handwritten cards into that old wooden recipe box my husband had given me for Christmas decades ago. It was scratched and faded, but to me it was priceless. Then came the worst year of my life. My husband, Carter, fell ill. The sickness came fast, like a storm you don't see coming until it's already tearing the roof off your home. I cared for him as best I could, spooning broth into his mouth, holding his hand through nights of pain. Evelyn barely visited. Paul came by now and then, distracted, always with one eye on his phone. When Carter passed, my heart cracked wide open. After decades of building a life together, suddenly I was alone. The funeral was a blur of black clothes, polite words, and the sound of dirt falling on his coffin. And then, before I had even wiped away my tears, Evelyn struck. The day after the funeral, she came storming into my kitchen with 2 large garbage bags. "This house needs to be cleaned out," she said. "Paul and I can't handle all this clutter. It's time to move forward." I tried to protest. but grief had made me weak. I watched her move through my home like a tornado, sweeping up what she didn't understand. Then her hands landed on the recipe box. "This," she sneered. "Junk. Who even keeps this?" My heart lurched. "Please, Evelyn, don't touch that," I begged. She rolled her eyes. "Come on, Rose. It's just a box of old food notes. Nobody cares. I'll get rid of it for you." And before I could stop her, she tossed it into the black trash bag with a clatter that felt like a gunshot. I wanted to dive in, to rip open the bag and pull it out. But the room was spinning, my chest tight with grief. I froze, silent, while she tied the bag and dragged it out to the curb. By the time I gathered the strength to move, the garbage truck had already taken it away. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the empty space where the box had always sat. My hand shook. I felt stripped bare. That box wasn't just paper, it was my life's work, my memories, the one piece of me I had always thought would survive. But Evelyn had taken even that. For weeks after, I moved through life like a ghost. I cooked less and less, avoiding the stove because the memories hurt too much. Paul didn't notice. Evelyn certainly didn't care. And slowly I began to realize that my kindness, my patience, had made me easy to trample. But fate has a strange way of turning cruelty into opportunity. Months later, long after Evelyn had thrown away my worthless box, a phone call would change everything. A man's voice, sharp and professional, asking questions about a certain sauce he'd tasted years ago at a church potluck. A sauce he believed could be worth millions. A sauce McDonald's themselves wanted to buy. And when Evelyn realized what she had done, what she had thrown away, her face went pale with the kind of regret that cuts bone deep. But what she didn't know yet was that I wasn't as powerless as she thought. I had a secret she couldn't even imagine. And that, my dear listeners, is where the Real story begins. The phone call came on a quiet Tuesday morning. I remember because I had just made myself a cup of tea, the kind of morning routine I clung to after losing Carter. The phone rang, and when I picked it up, the man on the other end introduced himself in a tone that made me sit straighter. "Mrs. Rose Thompson?" he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "My name is David Miller. I work with the development team at McDonald's corporate. I know this may sound strange, but I was given your name in connection with a recipe, a sauce, specifically, that you created years ago. We're extremely interested in acquiring it." At first, I thought it was a prank. Who calls a 65-year-old widow in Ohio asking to buy her recipes? But David's voice was too steady, too polished. He went on. "We've been trying to track down the origin of a sauce that made quite an impression when one of our team members encountered it years ago at a small community gathering. He mentioned your name, and after some research, we believe you may hold the formula. If that's the case, Mrs. Thompson, we are prepared to offer you $2 million for the rights." I nearly dropped the phone. $2 million? For a recipe Evelyn had tossed into the trash like rotten fruit? My chest tightened, but this time it wasn't grief. It was something else. Something fierce. My silence must have worried him, because David spoke again. "Mrs. Thompson? Are you still there?" "Yes," I whispered. I'm here. But I don't know what to say." "Think it over," he said warmly. "I'll follow up in a week. But please understand, we are very serious about this." When I hung up the phone, my hands trembled. My heart raced. I felt alive for the first time since Carter's funeral. But then another thought crashed into me like a brick. Evelyn. She had thrown the recipe box away. If McDonald's needed the formula, how could I give it to them without it? And then, like a candle flickering back to life, I remembered something. The recipe box Evelyn had thrown away was not the only place I kept my secrets. Years ago, Carter had convinced me to make copies of my most treasured recipes, just in case, he'd said. I had tucked those duplicates into a notebook hidden at the very back of my bedroom closet. My lips curled into a smile. Evelyn thought she had destroyed me, but she hadn't. That night, as the house grew dark and quiet, I pulled the notebook from its hiding place. My fingers brushed over the pages, and there it was, the secret sauce recipe, safe and waiting. Tears stung my eyes, but this time they weren't from sorrow. Carter had saved me, even from the grave. The next morning, Paul and Evelyn dropped by. They had a habit of visiting only when it suited them, usually when they wanted something. Sure enough, Evelyn walked in with a bright fake smile and a list of small favors she wanted me to help with. Paul sat at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone, barely looking up. I watched them both with new eyes. They saw me as weak, as someone they could control. But sitting there with the notebook hidden safely upstairs, I realized I had something they could never take away from me again. Power. I didn't mention the phone call. I didn't tell them about the $2 million. I simply smiled, poured them coffee, and listened to Evelyn complain about how exhausting it was being married to a man who worked so much. Inside, though, I was burning with a secret they couldn't touch. Later that week, David called again. This time I was ready. I told him I still had the recipe and was willing to discuss terms. He was thrilled and promised to arrange a formal meeting. My world, which had felt so small and broken since Carter's death, suddenly opened wide. But here's the thing about secrets. They don't stay buried for long. Evelyn started noticing small changes in me. Maybe it was the way I carried myself, no longer hunched and defeated. Maybe it was the way I hummed while I cooked again. One evening, as I was setting a pot of sauce to simmer, she cornered me in the kitchen. "What's going on with you?" she asked, her eyes narrow. "Nothing," I said lightly. "Don't lie. I can tell. You look different. Happier. What are you hiding?" Her suspicion sent a chill down my spine. Evelyn was like a hound. Once she scented something, she wouldn't stop digging. I brushed her off, but I could see her mind working, gears turning behind her sharp eyes. The less extreme days passed quietly, but the tension was growing. Evelyn started showing up unannounced, poking through drawers when she thought I wasn't looking. She even rifled through my pantry, pretending she was looking for sugar. I knew she was searching for something. She didn't know what, but she could feel it. Then came the night that shifted everything. It was a Friday evening when Paul and Evelyn invited me to dinner at their house. I almost said no, but something in Evelyn's voice made me wary. At the table, Evelyn poured me a glass of wine and smiled too sweetly. "So, Rose," she said casually, "any new projects you're working on? Any recipes you've been experimenting with?" I froze for half a second, then forced a laugh. "Oh, just the usual. Nothing special." Her smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. She leaned in slightly, her voice lower. "You know, it's funny. The other day, I was talking to one of Paul's business friends. He mentioned McDonald's is paying crazy money for some new sauce recipe they're chasing. Can you imagine? Millions for something like that." My fork clattered against the plate. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. She had found out, and at that moment, I knew the game had changed. Evelyn's smile at that dinner table still haunts me. It wasn't the smile of a woman enjoying a pleasant evening. No, it was the smile of a predator who had just caught the scent of blood. Her wine glass twirled slowly in her hand as her words hung in the air. "Millions for a sauce recipe," she repeated, as if testing me. Her eyes never left mine. I forced a chuckle, trying to mask the thundering of my heart. That's crazy. Who would pay that much for food? But Evelyn wasn't fooled. She leaned closer across the table, lowering her voice until even Paul, distracted with his phone, couldn't hear. "I know you're hiding something, Rose, and I'm going to find out what it is." Her words felt like a blade pressed to my throat. I smiled, but inside I was reeling. Evelyn wasn't guessing anymore, she knew. For the rest of dinner, I played the part of the sweet, clueless mother-in-law, laughing at Paul's bad jokes and complimenting Evelyn's store-bought dessert. But all the while, I kept my face calm and my hand steady, even though inside I was screaming. When I finally returned home that night, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing heavily. Evelyn had smelled the secret. If she discovered the notebook hidden in my closet, everything would be ruined. Not just the deal with McDonald's, the last piece of dignity I had left. I crept upstairs and pulled the notebook out, clutching it to my chest. Carter's handwriting was scribbled on the first page. "Always protect this, Rosie. It's worth more than gold." I whispered into the empty room, "Don't worry, love. I'll guard it with my life." The next morning, I made a decision. The notebook couldn't stay in the house. Not with Evelyn prowling around like a fox in the henhouse. So, I wrapped it carefully in a plastic bag and walked to the small bank in town. My heart thudded as I signed the papers for a safe deposit box. When I slid the notebook inside and the metal door clanged shut, I finally exhaled. Safe. For now. That was the calmer stretch, those days of secret relief. But like every calm before a storm, it didn't last. 2 weeks later, Evelyn showed up at my door without knocking. She barged in, her heels clicking against the wooden floor like warning shots. "Rose, where's that recipe?" she demanded. No fake smile this time, no sugar in her tone. Her eyes were blazing. I blinked at her, keeping my voice soft. "What recipe are you talking about, dear?" "Don't play dumb with me," she snapped. "McDonald's called you, didn't they? You've been sitting on some gold mine this whole time, and you didn't say a word. That's selfish, Rose. Paul and I could have used that money." Her words sliced me open. "Not we as a family. Not you could use it too, Rose. No, it was all about Paul and her." I straightened, my voice firmer now. "That recipe is mine. I created it. I guarded it for decades. It's not yours to claim." For a moment, Evelyn's face twisted with rage, but then, just as quickly, she plastered on a smile. A smile that was worse than her anger. "Oh, Rose," she said sweetly, "you're old. You don't know how to handle something like this. Contracts, corporations, negotiations, you'd get eaten alive. Let me and Paul handle it. We'll make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of. The words dripped with condescension, like I was some fragile relic who couldn't count to 10 without help. I met her gaze. "No." Her smile faltered. "I'll handle this myself," I said firmly. "I don't need your help." The silence between us was thick, dangerous. Finally, Evelyn stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "You'll regret this," she hissed. And then she was gone, slamming the door behind her. For days after, I lived with a pit in my stomach. Evelyn wasn't the kind of woman who gave up. If anything, my refusal had only lit a fire under her. I kept the bank receipt for the deposit box tucked in my wallet, checking it every morning like a talisman. But Evelyn was cunning, and she was patient. The next blow came on a Sunday afternoon. Paul stopped by alone, his face unusually serious. He sat at the table across from me, avoiding my eyes. "Mom," he began. "Evelyn told me about the recipe." I closed my eyes. Of course she had. "She thinks you're being unfair," Paul continued awkwardly. "If this deal is real, it could change our lives. We could pay off debts, invest, set up something for the kids." I cut him off sharply. "Our lives, Paul? Or just yours and Evelyn's?" He flinched. I saw the little boy he used to be flash across his face for just a second. But then it was gone, replaced by the man Evelyn had molded. "You can't hoard this, Mom," he said, his voice firm now. "It's selfish. If you won't give us access to the recipe, maybe it's time I start looking into what legal options we have." Legal options? My own son, threatening to take me to court over the work of my hands and heart. I didn't argue. I just looked at him until he grew uncomfortable and left. But inside, my heart was breaking all over again. I thought betrayal couldn't cut deeper than watching Evelyn throw away my recipe box. I thought nothing could hurt more than seeing her sneer at the life's work I had poured into those cards. But I was wrong. Hearing my own son, my Paul, threaten me for money, that was the knife that twisted hardest. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about protecting my recipe anymore. This was about revenge. Evelyn and Paul wanted to play dirty? Then so would I. They thought I was just an old woman they could push around. But they had forgotten something important. Old women have lived long lives. We know how to wait, how to plot, and how to strike when no one expects it. I had survived heartbreak, poverty, and loss. And I would survive this. But they had no idea what storm they had just invited into their lives. And that storm was me. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to show its teeth. That night, after Paul's threat about legal options, I sat alone at my kitchen table with the lights dimmed low. I stared at Carter's photo on the wall, his smile frozen in time. "They think I'm weak, love," I whispered. "But I'm not. I won't let them win." The extreme event began with a single decision. I called David from McDonald's the very next morning. I'm ready to move forward, I told him. He sounded delighted. That's wonderful, Mrs. Thompson. We'll draw up preliminary papers and send a representative to meet with you in Columbus. Will next week work? Columbus was only 2 hours from my home. My stomach fluttered, but I forced confidence into my voice. Yes, that will work. This was it. My counterattack. But I wasn't going to run into it blind. I knew Evelyn and Paul would sniff around, desperate to sabotage me. So I began to weave a little web of lies. The calmer stretch came in the following days, when I pretended to carry on life as usual. I baked pies and took them to church, smiled at the neighbors, and even let Evelyn come over and complain about her manicure appointment being too stressful. All the while, the notebook stayed safe in the deposit box, untouchable. But behind that calm exterior, I was moving carefully. I visited a lawyer, an old family friend named Richard, a man I trusted more than anyone besides Carter. I told him everything. The recipe, McDonald's offer, Evelyn's threats. His brow furrowed deeply. But when I finished, he leaned across the desk and said, Rose, if they try anything, I'll have your back. We'll lock this up tight in writing. They won't touch a dime. That gave me a new strength. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had an ally. Meanwhile, Evelyn's paranoia grew like weeds after rain. She called me at odd hours, fishing for details. So, Rose, made any new friends lately? Any business calls? You seem busier these days, her voice always sweet, but her questions sharp as knives. I played dumb, pretending not to notice. Oh, just catching up on old hobbies, I'd say. Or, spending more time at church, dear. Her frustration began to show. I could see it in the tightness of her jaw, the way she snapped at Paul when he forgot to take the trash out. She wanted control, and the more she realized she didn't have it, the more desperate she became. Then, one evening, I returned home from the grocery store to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart leapt into my throat. Inside, the house looked normal until I reached the bedroom. The closet door stood open. Drawers had been rifled through. Evelyn had been there. I sank onto the bed, trembling with fury but also satisfaction. She thought she was clever, but she was searching in the wrong place. The notebook was safe, far beyond her reach. Still, the violation cut deep. She hadn't even bothered to pretend anymore. She was hunting openly now. And if she was this bold already, what would she try next? The calm couldn't last. It was the night before my scheduled meeting in Columbus when the next extreme event struck like lightning. Paul showed up at my house, his face pale and drawn. He sat heavily at the table, wringing his hands. Mom, we need to talk. I studied him wary. About what? Evelyn, he said, his voice low. She's getting out of control. She told me last night she's willing to do anything to get that recipe. She's even been calling lawyers. She wants to see you, Mom, to force you to hand it over. My stomach twisted. It was one thing for Evelyn to threaten me herself, but to drag my own son deeper into her schemes, it was unbearable. Paul, I said carefully, what did you tell her? He avoided my gaze. I didn't know what to say. I don't want to choose between my wife and my mother, but she's scaring me. For a flicker of a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, scared and unsure, caught in something bigger than himself. My heart ached for him. But before I could speak, the front door banged open. Evelyn stormed in, her eyes blazing, her lips pulled back in a snarl. She slammed a stack of papers on the table between us. Enough games, Rose, she hissed. You're signing this. Right now. I looked down. Legal documents. A draft contract giving Paul and Evelyn joint rights to the recipe. The sight stole my breath. She had gone this far. She was ready to bleed me dry. Legally, emotionally, financially. And in that moment, the quiet, patient part of me snapped. I rose slowly, meeting her glare with a steadiness I didn't know I still possessed. My voice was low but sharp as glass. Evelyn, if you think you can bully me into giving you what's mine, you're more foolish than I thought. Her face twisted with rage. You'll regret this, old woman. And then, with one swift motion, she grabbed the papers and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Paul sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Mom, he whispered. But I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was staring at the closed door, my blood pounding. Evelyn had just declared war, and I was ready to fight. The morning I left for Columbus, the air felt heavy, like the sky itself was holding its breath. I packed light, a clean blouse, my notebook with Carter's words tucked deep in my purse, and a folder of notes I'd written for myself. My hands trembled as I locked the front door, but my jaw was set. This was my moment. The drive from my small Ohio town to the city took just under 2 hours. I played old country songs on the radio, Carter's favorites, letting the twang and steel guitar steady my nerves. As the skyline of Columbus rose in the distance, a wave of determination washed over me. David from McDonald's met me in a modest conference room at a hotel downtown. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his late 30s, his suit crisp, his handshake firm. But his eyes lit up the moment he saw the worn notebook I laid carefully on the table. "Mrs. Thompson," he said warmly, "you have no idea how excited we are about this. Our team has been chasing the taste of this sauce for years." I smiled faintly. "It's just a recipe, Mr. Miller. Nothing more." He shook his head. "No, Rose. It's more. Sometimes the simplest things are worth the most." Hearing him say my name like that made me feel seen, respected. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. We spent hours going over terms. David explained royalties, licensing, and legal protections in plain words. I asked questions, scribbled notes, and surprised him with how sharp I still was. "I may be 65, I told him, "but I can read fine print." He laughed, but with respect, not mockery. By the time I left that room, a draft agreement in hand, my spirit was soaring. $2 million. Independence. Security. Revenge, sweet and quiet, against Evelyn's cruelty. But even as I drove home, a shadow lingered. Because while I was fighting my battle in Columbus, Evelyn was plotting hers back home. The calmer part of that week almost lulled me into believing things were finally turning. I returned from the city humming, cooked myself a celebratory dinner of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, and even allowed myself a glass of wine. The papers from McDonald sat locked in my desk drawer, safe and waiting. I visited Richard, my lawyer, and handed him a copy. He grinned. "Rose, this is airtight. They won't get a crumb of it. Evelyn can scream all she wants. This belongs to you." His words were a balm. For the first time since Carter's death, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was winning. But Evelyn wasn't resting. While I enjoyed my chicken and quiet evenings, she was spinning her web tighter. She began planting seeds in Paul's head, whispering poison about how I was keeping secrets and robbing them of their future. Paul, torn as always between the woman he married and the mother who raised him, grew more distant. He stopped calling. When I invited him for Sunday dinner, he declined. "We're busy, Mom. Maybe next week." I knew whose voice was behind that answer. Evelyn's. Always Evelyn's. The calm cracked one Thursday evening when I stopped by their house unannounced, carrying a pie like I had so many times before. Paul opened the door, his face pale, his smile forced. "Mom," he stammered, "this isn't a good time." Behind him, I caught a glimpse of Evelyn in the living room, huddled with 2 men in suits. Papers spread across the coffee table. When she saw me, her face hardened like stone. "Rose," she said coldly, rising to her feet. "You shouldn't just drop by like this." My stomach sank. I knew that look. She was scheming. "Who are they?" I asked, nodding toward the strangers. "No one you need to worry about," she said quickly. Too quickly. But I wasn't blind. Those men were lawyers, and I knew exactly what Evelyn was doing. She was building her case, preparing to strike. I set the pie down on the porch railing and looked Paul in the eyes. "Son, think carefully about the choices you're making. Once you cross some lines, you can't come back." He swallowed hard, but he didn't speak. Evelyn's shadow loomed too strong over him. I walked away, my chest heavy, but my head high. If she wanted war, she was going to get one. That weekend, the storm broke. I returned from church to find my mailbox stuffed with an envelope. I tore it open, and my hands shook as I read the words. Notice of intent to file suit. Evelyn had gone through with it. She and Paul were suing me for withholding marital assets and demanding joint ownership of the recipe. The paper slipped from my hands. My vision blurred. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was attack. Ruthless, calculated, and cruel. I staggered inside, clutching Carter's picture frame like it was the only thing keeping me upright. They're trying to take everything, love, I whispered through tears. Everything we built. But as the sobs racked my chest, another fire began to burn beneath them. Let them sue. Let them drag me into court. I wasn't afraid. Because while Evelyn thought she had cornered me, she didn't know the truth. She didn't know about Richard, the lawyer waiting with every document ready. She didn't know that the real power wasn't in the notebook or the recipe, it was in me. And she was about to learn that underestimating Rose Thompson was the biggest mistake she had ever made. The courthouse in Franklin County stood tall and intimidating, its marble columns like silent judges of their own. I'd only been inside once before, years ago, to pay a small traffic ticket, and the memory of that day had left me shaking. Now, walking up those steps with Evelyn and Paul just a few yards ahead of me, it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on my shoulders. Evelyn strutted in her heels, head high, her black dress sharp and cold. Paul followed close, but his eyes never met mine. My son, my only son, walking ahead of me as though I were the enemy. That cut deeper than any lawsuit ever could. Inside, the air smelled of paper and old polish. I clutched my purse tightly, Carter's photo tucked safely inside. I whispered to it under my breath, "Be with me today." My lawyer, Richard, was already waiting in the courtroom. He gave me a small, reassuring nod as I slid into the chair beside him. Across the aisle, Evelyn's lawyers stacked their folders like weapons, their polished pens ready for battle. Evelyn sat smugly between them, one hand resting possessively on Paul's arm. When the judge entered and the room rose, my knees nearly buckled. But I stood tall. If Evelyn wanted war, then war she would have. The opening statements sliced through the air like knives. Evelyn's lawyer painted me as a greedy old woman hoarding family wealth, selfishly withholding what he called a marital asset developed during the union of Rose and her late husband, Carter. His voice dripped with practiced sympathy as he glanced toward Paul, portraying him as the wronged son, unfairly excluded from his rightful inheritance. I wanted to shout, "Inheritance?" Carter's notebook was never yours to inherit. It was mine to protect. But I stayed silent. My turn would come. Then Richard stood. Calm, clear and sharp as glass. "Your Honor," he began, "the plaintiff's argument rests on a false assumption. The recipe in question is not marital property. It is intellectual property created solely by Mrs. Thompson and maintained by her throughout her marriage. The notebook is hers, undisputed in Carter Thompson's will. This suit is nothing more than an attempt at theft under the guise of family entitlement." Evelyn's lips tightened. Paul shifted uneasily in his chair. The judge leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "We'll hear the evidence." The calmer part of that morning unfolded in a blur of documents, signatures, and testimony. Richard presented Carter's will, highlighting the clause that left all personal writings, creative works, and recipes to me. He even had witnesses, old family friends, ready to testify that the sauce was my creation, perfected in my kitchen long before Evelyn ever joined the family. For a moment, I almost believed the storm might pass. My voice didn't shake as I answered the lawyer's questions. My hand stayed steady when I pointed to the clause in Carter's will. Even the judge's face softened when I described the nights Carter and I spent laughing over a bubbling pot, scribbling notes in the margins of that notebook. But Evelyn wasn't finished. When it was her turn, she leaned forward, her voice sharp, rehearsed. "Your Honor, Rose may claim ownership. But what she forgets is that this recipe was perfected during her marriage. What's hers was Carter's, and what was Carter's was meant for his family. Paul is Carter's son. He deserves his share. And Rose, well, she smiled thinly. She's keeping secrets. Ask her where that notebook really is." My blood turned cold. She knew. Somehow she knew I'd hidden it. Richard immediately objected. "Speculation, Your Honor. No evidence." But the damage was done. The judge glanced at me with curiosity. "Mrs. Thompson, where is the original notebook?" My throat tightened. This was the question I dreaded. I couldn't risk Evelyn ever getting her hands on it, but I also couldn't lie under oath. "It's safe," I said carefully. "Where it belongs." Which means what exactly? Evelyn's lawyer pounced. Before I could answer, Richard leaned forward. Objection again. Mrs. Thompson has no obligation to disclose the physical location unless it is legally required for evidence, which it is not. The judge nodded slowly. Sustained. Move on. Evelyn's glare could have cut through stone. She wanted to scream, to drag the truth out of me, but the law was not on her side. Not yet. The rest of the session played out like a tug of war. They threw accusations, we countered with evidence. They tried to frame me as unstable. Richard produced letters from Carter praising my discipline and strength. Every time they pushed, we pushed back. Still, the air in that courtroom grew tighter, darker. I could feel Evelyn's rage boiling beneath her polished mask. Paul sat silent beside her, eyes down, as if he couldn't bear to meet mine. When the judge finally adjourned for the day, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Richard squeezed my shoulder. You did good, Rose. Real good. They don't have a leg to stand on. But as I walked out of that courthouse, something inside me whispered, it's not over. She's not done. That night, the calmer rhythm returned. I made myself tea, sat by the window, and wrote in my own notebook. Not the recipe one, just a simple journal where I poured out my thoughts. They think they can break me, I wrote. But I've stood through worse storms. I will not bend. I will not give her my soul. I thought of Carter, his laughter, his kindness, and it gave me strength. I thought of the nights he'd hold my hand after long shifts, reminding me that love was worth more than gold. Evelyn didn't understand that. She never would. But just as my spirit began to steady, the phone rang. I answered, expecting Richard or maybe a church friend. But the voice on the other end made my blood freeze. It was David. Rose, he said quickly, his tone urgent, we need to talk. Now, I just got a call from someone claiming to represent your family. They're saying they own partial rights to the recipe and that any deal with you could be contested in court. My heart slammed against my ribs. Evelyn. It had to be Evelyn. I told them we have no agreement yet, but Rose, his voice dropped. They had details. Too many details. Someone's feeding them information. The teacup slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor. Evelyn wasn't just fighting me in court. She was trying to destroy my future, ruin my deal, and rip away the last thing I had left. And if I didn't act fast, she just might succeed. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard David's voice echoing in my head. They had details. Too many details. I sat at the kitchen table, the shards of my broken teacup still scattered on the floor, staring at Carter's photo. The smile in his eyes seemed to whisper, don't let her win, Rose. Don't give her the power. By dawn, my heart was pounding, but my spirit was clear. If Evelyn wanted to play dirty, then I would meet her blow for blow. I called Richard the moment his office opened. She's going after McDonald's, I said, my voice sharp. He sighed, almost as if he'd been expecting it. I figured she might. Evelyn doesn't just want the recipe. She wants to destroy your credibility so nobody else will touch it. What do we do? I asked, pacing the kitchen. We cut her off at the knees, he replied. I'll draft a cease and desist letter this morning. Any false claim she makes about owning rights to the recipe will be considered slander and interference with business relations. That's illegal. And if she keeps it up, we'll take her for damages. The steel in his voice gave me strength. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. But even with Richard's reassurances, doubt gnawed at me. Evelyn wasn't stupid. She knew exactly where to hurt me. And Paul, my Paul, was letting her use him like a puppet. By noon, David called again. Rose, I told my higher-ups what's happening. They're nervous. We still want this deal. But if your family's lawsuit drags out too long, it could scare the board. They don't want a scandal. My knees nearly buckled. David, please, don't walk away. This recipe, it's all I have left. There was a pause on the line. Then his voice softened. I believe in you, Rose. I can tell you're the real deal. But I need you to promise me something. What's that? Fight like hell. Don't let them take you down. Because if you can clear this mess, I'll fight for you in that boardroom. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. I promise. After we hung up, I sat in silence, my fists clenched. That promise wasn't just for David. It was for Carter, for myself, for every quiet woman who'd ever been told she was worthless. The calmer rhythm of the following days almost tricked me into thinking I had a handle on things. Richard sent the cease and desist. My church friends prayed for me. I baked bread, kneading the dough like I was pushing my anger into every fold. But the peace never lasted long. Evelyn had a way of turning even the calmest waters into storms. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a car pull up outside. Peeking through the curtain, I froze. It was Paul, alone. I hurried to the door, heart leaping. Maybe he was finally coming to his senses. Maybe he was ready to stand with his mother instead of against her. He stood on the porch, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, eyes darting nervously. "Hi, Mom." "Paul," I whispered, pulling the door open. "Come in, please." He hesitated before stepping inside. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, and for a brief second, his shoulders relaxed, as if the scent pulled him back to childhood. We sat at the table. I poured him a glass of sweet tea. He didn't drink it. "Mom," he began slowly, "Evelyn, she's really upset. She says you're trying to cut us out of everything." "Paul," I said softly, "all I'm doing is protecting what your father and I built. That notebook isn't junk. It's our life's work. Evelyn threw it away because she didn't see the value, but I did. And now that she knows it's worth something, suddenly she wants to claim it? That's not right." His jaw tightened. She thinks it should stay in the family." "In the family?" I snapped before I could stop myself. "Paul, I am your family. Not those lawyers, not Evelyn's greed. Me, the woman who raised you, who sacrificed for you, who would have given you the world if you'd only asked kindly." His eyes flickered, shame flashing across his face. But then, just as quickly, the walls came back up. I just don't want this to tear us apart." I reached across the table, taking his hand. "Son, it's not the recipe tearing us apart. It's the lies. And if you don't open your eyes soon, you're going to lose more than just a sauce. You're going to lose me." For a moment, I thought I saw him break. His lips trembled, his hand gripped mine tighter. But then, as if remembering Evelyn's voice in his ear, he pulled back. "I have to go," he muttered, standing. And just like that, he was gone. I sank into the chair, tears spilling down my cheeks. Losing Carter had nearly broken me. Losing Paul, that might finish the job. I didn't know how much time passed before I finally stood, wiped my face, and whispered to Carter's photo, "She won't win. Even if it costs me everything, she won't win." But Evelyn wasn't finished yet. 2 days later, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't David or Richard. It was a voice I didn't recognize. Smooth, professional, almost smug. "Mrs. Thompson?" "Yes," I answered cautiously. "This is Mark Dillard, attorney representing McDonald's corporate interests. I wanted to inform you of a new development. Earlier today, we received an anonymous package containing what claims to be your original recipe notebook." My breath caught in my throat. "That can't be," I whispered. "It's locked away. Safe." "Be that as it may," he continued, "this notebook contains detailed recipes and handwritten notes with your name signed on several pages. If authentic, it complicates matters significantly, as the sender has claimed joint ownership with your son, Paul Thompson." The room spun around me. Evelyn. She must have forged it. She must have copied my handwriting somehow, or stolen old papers and pieced them together. But the voice on the phone kept going, each word like a dagger. "Mrs. Thompson, until this dispute is resolved, McDonald's will be forced to place all negotiations with you on hold." The line went dead. My hand trembled as the phone slipped from my ear. My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor, staring at Carter's picture through a blur of tears. Evelyn hadn't just declared war. She had stolen my identity, my voice, my very history. And unless I found a way to prove the truth, she might actually succeed. For a long time, I just sat there on the kitchen floor, the phone lying cold beside me, Carter's picture blurred through my tears. The rage boiling inside me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Evelyn hadn't just lied. She had stolen my very voice. My recipes were my life, my history, my soul, and now she had forged them to make the world believe they were hers. I pressed my palm against my chest, whispering into the silence, "Carter, if you can hear me, I need you. I can't fight this monster alone." The next morning, I stormed into Richard's office. His secretary barely got out a good morning before I burst through the door, slamming the fake notebook copy onto his desk. "They're saying this is mine," I spat, my hands trembling. Richard adjusted his glasses, flipping carefully through the pages. His brow furrowed as he examined the handwriting. "She's good," he muttered. "This looks almost identical to your script, but not perfect." "Not perfect?" I asked, my voice shaking. He tapped a page near the back. "Here, this word, oregano. Look at the way it's written. You always loop your G-lo, almost like a tail. Here it's short, clipped. Whoever copied this wasn't paying close enough attention." I leaned closer, hope sparking in my chest. He was right. My hand always dipped lower on certain letters, a quirk Carter used to tease me about. Richard looked up, his expression firm. "We can use this. Forgery isn't just illegal, it's a crime. If we can prove Evelyn made this, not only will her case collapse, but she could face charges." The fire in my chest grew brighter. For the first time since that awful phone call, I felt steady again. Evelyn thought she could outsmart me, but she underestimated the one thing she could never fake: my truth. The calmer days that followed were filled with planning and gathering evidence. Richard contacted handwriting experts. I dug through old recipe cards, journals, even the letters Carter and I had written to each other when we were younger. Every loop, every flourish, every quirk of my hand was proof that Evelyn's copy was a fraud. In the evenings, when the weight felt heavy again, I would sit by the window with Carter's notebook in my lap. Running my fingers over his faded notes, I felt his presence with me. He'd scribbled "too much vinegar, Rose" in one corner, and I couldn't help but smile through my tears. That notebook wasn't just a recipe, it was our story. No forgery in the world could erase that. But Evelyn wasn't slowing down. One Saturday morning, as I was kneading bread, the doorbell rang. I wiped the flour from my hands and opened the door to find Paul standing there again. This time he looked different, pale, agitated. His eyes darted back to the car idling in the street, where I could see Evelyn sitting in the driver's seat, arms crossed. "Paul," I said quietly, "come in." He shook his head, glancing nervously at the car. "I can't stay, Mom. I needed to warn you." "Warn me?" My heart clenched. He leaned closer, his voice trembling. "Evelyn, she's not stopping. She says if you don't hand over the notebook, she's going to dig deeper. She's hiring private investigators. She's even talking about going after your bank records, your house, everything." The room tilted. "My house?" Paul's eyes flickered with guilt. "She says she'll prove you're hiding money, that you're stealing from us." I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. "Paul, listen to me. You know this isn't right. You know your father would never want this." Tears welled in his eyes, but he shook his head. "I can't go against her. Not anymore." Before I could answer, he turned and hurried back to the car. Evelyn rolled down her window, her smile sharp as a blade, and gave me a little wave before pulling away. I stood frozen on the porch, fury burning hotter than ever. She was trying to strip me of everything. My recipe, my money, even my home. But as the anger pulsed through me, a thought came clear as glass. If Evelyn wanted war, then I was going to give her one she'd never forget. The calm was gone. The storm was here. And the next morning, when I went to open my front door, I found something that made my blood run cold. A single sheet of paper taped to the wood. In bold, black letters, it read, "Eviction notice. This property now under legal review." The words on the paper blurred as my eyes filled with tears. Eviction notice. For a moment, I thought it had to be some cruel prank. But the bold stamp at the bottom, the seal of the county clerk's office, made my stomach twist into knots. I stumbled back into the house, the notice clutched in my shaking hands. Evelyn had finally gone for the jugular. My home, the place Carter and I had built with sweat and laughter and late nights fixing leaks, was under attack. Dropping into the armchair, I pressed the paper against my chest. My voice cracked as I whispered into the empty room. "Carter, they're trying to take everything. Even this. What would you have me do?" Silence answered, heavy and suffocating. But then my phone rang. I snatched it up, half expecting Evelyn's smug voice. Instead, it was Richard. "Rose, I just got word," he said without preamble. "They filed for a temporary review of your property under the claim that it was purchased with funds tied to the recipe. It's a scare tactic. They can't win this, not with the documentation we have, but they're trying to rattle you." "Well, it's working," I admitted, my voice breaking. "Richard, this house, it's all I have left of Carter. If they take it—" "They won't," he interrupted firmly. "Not if I have anything to say about it. But Rose, you need to prepare yourself. Evelyn is escalating. She's throwing every stone she can find. And Paul," his voice softened. "I'm sorry. He signed the paperwork too." My chest tightened. My son's name, written beside hers, trying to evict his own mother. That was a wound no court could heal. After we hung up, the calmer rhythm of the day tried to carry me forward. I cooked myself a small meal, though my appetite was gone. I prayed in the quiet, asking for strength, asking for patience. But as I washed the dishes, a knock came at the door. My heart leapt in fear, but when I opened it, I saw not Evelyn or some court official, but Love. Sweet, kind-hearted Love, my neighbor from 2 houses down. She was carrying a basket of muffins, her smile soft with concern. "I heard," she said simply, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Word travels fast in small towns. I sank into a chair, the notice spread across the table. She set the basket down and pulled me into her arms like a daughter would a mother. "You're not alone in this, Rose," she whispered. "Don't you dare forget that." Her words, simple as they were, filled a hollow part of me I hadn't realized was empty. Maybe Evelyn had Paul under her spell, but I still had people who believed in me, people who saw me. The calmer days that followed were filled with strategy. Richard filed an emergency motion to block the eviction. Love checked in every evening, bringing food, sitting with me, reminding me I still had a family outside of blood. Even Evelyn's poison couldn't reach every corner of my world. But just when I started to breathe again, the next storm hit. It was a Wednesday afternoon when David called. His voice was sharper this time, urgent. "Rose, I don't know how to tell you this, but McDonald's board is meeting tomorrow. Evelyn has somehow gotten herself on the agenda. She's claiming to have evidence that you falsified documents, and she's going to present it directly to the executives." The phone nearly slipped from my hands. "She what?" "She's trying to kill the deal once and for all," David said grimly. "If she convinces them you can't be trusted, Rose, this whole opportunity could vanish overnight." My heart pounded, my breath shallow. Evelyn wasn't just trying to take my house now. She was trying to erase my name, smear it until no one would ever believe me again. "David," I whispered, clutching the phone tight, "what do I do?" His voice softened, but it carried an edge. "You show up. You fight. You prove to them, and to her, that the truth can't be faked." I stared at Carter's notebook on the table, my reflection trembling in its worn cover. Evelyn thought she could destroy me with lies. But tomorrow, in that boardroom, the truth would finally be tested. And if I lost, I'd lose everything. The next morning, I woke before the sun. My hand shook as I buttoned my blouse, the same pale blue one I'd worn when I first met David in Columbus. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, and Carter used to say it brought out my eyes. I needed every bit of strength I could carry into that room. Love drove me to the city. "You don't need to fight this battle alone," she said firmly, gripping the steering wheel as though she could shield me herself. "And when you walk into that boardroom, remember, you're not just standing up for yourself. You're standing for every woman who's been underestimated." Her words burned into me like fire. The McDonald's headquarters in Columbus looked bigger than life itself. Glass walls reflected the morning light, and people in suits hurried through the revolving doors. My stomach knotted, but I straightened my back. Inside, the boardroom felt cold, all polished wood and leather chairs. At the far end sat the executives, men and women with sharp eyes, whispers passing between them like quick gusts of wind. David gave me a small nod from his seat near the middle. And there she was, Evelyn, draped in a cream suit, her hair twisted neatly, her smile razor thin. She looked like she belonged there, like she was the one who had built the recipe, who had sweated in a kitchen night after night. Paul sat beside her, his gaze glued to the table. The meeting began with introductions. Then Evelyn rose, her heels clicking like gunshots against the polished floor. She held up a leather folder and let her words drip with poison. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I regret to inform you that the woman you've been negotiating with, Rose Thompson, has not been entirely truthful. The recipe she claims as hers was created in partnership with her late husband. As his son, my husband Paul is entitled to equal rights. What's worse," she paused for dramatic effect, glancing at me, "we have reason to believe Rose has falsified documents to cover this up." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Evelyn slid copies of her forged notebook across the table. "This," she said triumphantly, "proves our claim." My chest burned. My fist clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. The chair at the head of the table turned toward me. "Mrs. Thompson," the senior executive said, his voice calm but firm, "you've heard the allegations. What do you have to say?" I stood slowly, my knees weak, but my heart ablaze. "First," I said, my voice trembling, "let me tell you a story." The calmer rhythm carried me as I spoke. I told them about Carter and me, the nights we laughed in our tiny Ohio kitchen, scribbling notes on scraps of paper. I told them about how the sauce was born not from greed, but from love, a labor of joy, perfected over decades. I pulled out Carter's real notebook, the leather cracked, the pages stained with sauce. My hands shook as I laid it gently on the table, like placing a child in the world's arms. "This is the truth," I said softly. "Every page, every note, every stain, this is my life. My husband's humor, my hand, my heart. Not a forgery, not a trick. Just us." For a moment, silence filled the room. Some executives leaned closer, studying the faded ink, the quirky handwriting, the grease marks in the corners. David's eyes glistened as he looked at me. He believed. At least one person in that room believed. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She shot to her feet, her voice sharp and cold. "That book could be anything. For all we know, she made that last night to cover her lies. You can't take her word over ours." The tension in the room snapped tight as a bowstring. The executives exchanged glances, whispers darting like arrows. One of them finally cleared his throat. "There's only one way to resolve this," he said. "We'll need forensic handwriting experts. Until then, negotiations are suspended." My breath caught. Suspended. Not canceled, but not safe either. Evelyn smirked, satisfied with the chaos she'd sown. I gathered Carter's notebook back into my arms, clutching it tight. "You can test it. Scrutinize it. Tear it apart if you must. The truth will stand." But even as I spoke those words, a shiver ran down my spine. Evelyn had resources, cunning, and no conscience. If she could forge one notebook, what else was she capable of fabricating? As the meeting adjourned, Evelyn leaned close to me, her whisper like venom in my ear. "You think you've won today, old woman, but by the time I'm finished, you won't have a house, a son, or a penny to your name." I stared into her cold eyes, the fire in me burning hotter than ever. But when I turned to leave the boardroom, a voice stopped me in my tracks. Mrs. Thompson, the senior executive, called. "Before you go, one more thing. We've received another submission, a completely different sauce formula, also claiming to be the original. And the sender? They say you gave it to them." The blood drained from my face. My vision blurred. Another forgery, another lie, another trap. And this time, it wasn't just Evelyn in the game. The boardroom emptied out like a sinking ship, executives gathering their papers, their eyes flicking between me and Evelyn as though they weren't sure which way the tide was turning. I stayed frozen in my chair, Carter's notebook clutched to my chest, my heart beating so loud I thought the whole room could hear it. Another submission, another formula, someone claiming I gave it to them. It felt like a knife twisting inside me. Evelyn I could fight. She was cruel, but at least I could see her face. This new threat? It was a ghost, stabbing me in the back while smiling in the dark. David lingered near the door. "Mrs. Thompson," he said gently, his brow furrowed with worry. Don't let this shake you. Forensics will prove the notebook is real. But what about the other recipe? I asked, my voice cracking. What if they use it to muddy the waters? What if they say I can't even remember my own work? He hesitated, then leaned closer. You need to be careful. If someone's bold enough to forge a second formula, it means they have access to inside information. This isn't just Evelyn anymore. Someone else is feeding her. The words lodged in my chest like stones. Love took my arm as we walked out of the building. Grandma, listen to me, she said firmly. You are not alone in this. We're going to find out who did this. And when we do, they'll regret ever trying to touch what you built. Her confidence should have comforted me. But all I felt was the gnawing pit of betrayal. Who else could know enough about my recipe to fake one? Had someone in my circle been selling pieces of my life to Evelyn? By the time we got home, my body ached with exhaustion. I sank into my armchair, staring at the quilt I'd stitched years ago, every patch a memory. Paul's laughter echoed faintly in my mind, from the years when he was still my boy, before Evelyn sank her claws into him. Would he really stand by and watch his wife burn me down? David came by later that evening. He sat on the couch, his hands folded, looking more like a friend than a lawyer. I pulled the details I could, he said. The second submission was sent anonymously, but it came with a typed letter. No handwriting to test. The only clue is it was mailed from right here in Columbus. Columbus, my own backyard. I swallowed hard. Someone close. Someone who knew enough to fake it. David nodded grimly. Which means until we find out who, you're at risk. They're trying to break your credibility, Rose. If the board believes you're unreliable, or worse, dishonest, Evelyn wins without lifting another finger. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, memories crashing over me like waves. Carter's voice in the kitchen. Paul's little hands when he was a boy, sticky with sauce from sneaking tastes out of the bowl. Evelyn's smirk at the funeral as she tossed my recipe box into the trash like it was nothing. I turned onto my side, tears pricking my eyes. Carter, I whispered into the dark, I'm trying. But they're taking everything from me. I don't know if I'm strong enough. The silence of the house pressed down on me. But in my heart, I felt something stir. A warmth. A whisper that wasn't words but steadiness itself. The next morning, I woke with a decision. If someone wanted to destroy me with lies, then I would drag every lie into the light. Love. And I spent the day going through old boxes in the attic. Recipe scraps, shopping lists, faded photos of Carter standing proudly with a sauce-stained apron. Every piece of proof we could find, we packed into a binder. If they wanted evidence, I'd bury them in it. But just as I started to feel that spark of control again, the phone rang. Love answered, her face pale as she held out the receiver. Grandma, it's for you. I pressed it to my ear. A voice, low and distorted, spoke from the other end. Stop fighting, Rose. Drop the claim, or you'll lose more than your recipe. You'll lose everything. The line went dead. The phone slipped from my hands. My knees buckled. Love caught me just before I hit the floor. Grandma, who is that? She whispered, her voice shaking. My lips trembled as I forced the words out. They know where we are, love, and they're not going to stop. The phone call echoed in my ears long after the line had gone dead. Those words, you'll lose everything, rattled around inside me like chains. Love rubbed my shoulders, her face pale. Grandma, we can't just sit here. That was a threat. A real one. We need to go to the police. My throat felt dry. The police won't do anything unless there's proof. And all we have is a voice on a phone line. By the time they trace it, whoever made the call will be long gone. But what if they're serious? Love pressed. What if they come here? Her fear cut me deeper than the call itself. She was young, full of fire, and she shouldn't have had to carry the weight of this fight. I reached for her hand. Listen to me. Whoever's behind this wants to scare us into giving up. If we quit now, they win without ever setting foot near us. Love bit her lip, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. I don't care about the money or the deal. I just care about you. I don't want to lose you. Her words softened something in me. For a moment, the storm inside quieted. I pulled her into a hug. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. They've taken enough already. I won't let them take me too. We spent the next day taking small steps to protect ourselves. Love installed new locks on the doors and even set up a cheap camera by the porch. I called David and told him about the call. His voice was tight with concern. "This is serious," he said. "I'll file a report with the company. They'll want to know someone is trying to sabotage the negotiations with intimidation. But Rose, be careful who you trust. If someone has inside knowledge of the recipe, it could mean the leak is closer than you think." That thought gnawed at me all day. I went back over every memory, every conversation. Who else had seen Carter's notebook? Who else knew the sauce inside out? My circle was small. Too small for this kind of betrayal. Late in the evening, Love brewed us tea, and we sat by the window, watching the Ohio sky turn purple. For a moment, life felt almost normal. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked softly. "About packing up and starting over somewhere they can't reach you?" I shook my head. Running doesn't fix anything. If I leave now, it means they've stolen not just my recipe, but my voice. And I refuse to let Evelyn silence me. Love nodded slowly, her jaw set. "Then I'm staying with you, no matter how bad this gets." Her loyalty was a balm to my wounded heart. But even as we shared that quiet moment, I knew peace couldn't last. Not with Evelyn in the picture. And I was right. The next morning, a knock thundered against the front door. Love hurried to answer it, and I heard her sharp gasp. I shuffled forward, and there on the porch stood two men in suits. One of them held a thick envelope stamped with bold, black letters. "Mrs. Thompson?" he asked, his tone clipped and official. "Yes." My voice trembled. He handed me the envelope. "You've been served." I tore it open with shaking hands, scanning the words. My breath caught in my throat. Lawsuit. Evelyn was suing me for defamation, fraud, and theft of intellectual property. She was demanding millions in damages, more than I could ever dream of paying. My knees went weak. Love grabbed my arm, steadying me as the men turned and walked away without another word. I clutched the papers, my vision swimming. Evelyn hadn't just threatened me. She was dragging me into a war I wasn't sure I could survive. The lawsuit papers shook in my hands as if they were alive, breathing poison straight into my chest. The bold letters screamed words I could hardly process. Fraud, defamation, theft. Evelyn hadn't just accused me of lying. She'd painted me as a criminal. Love paced the living room, her voice sharp with panic. "She can't do this. She can't just throw words like that around." "She can," I whispered. "And she has." Tears blurred my vision. All my life, I'd lived quietly, never bothering anyone. My world was my kitchen, my family, my church. And now here I was, dragged into a courtroom battle, my name smeared with lies. David arrived within the hour, his expression grim as he flipped through the pages. "I was afraid she'd try something like this," he said. "But I didn't think she'd go this far." "What does it mean?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "It means," he said slowly, "she's trying to bury you under legal fees, stress, and public shame. Even if her case has holes, fighting it will cost you. And Evelyn knows you don't have millions to spare." Love's hands curled into fists. "So, what? She just sues Grandma into the ground and walks away with everything." David shook his head. "Not if we fight smart. We'll file a counterclaim. We'll bring in evidence of the forgery, the intimidation. But Rose, this is going to get ugly. She's going to drag every part of your life into the spotlight. Are you ready for that?" Was I ready? No. But did I have a choice? Also no. I swallowed hard. If it's a fight she wants, then it's a fight she'll get. The days that followed blurred into a storm of paperwork, meetings, and sleepless nights. David guided me through depositions, carefully crafting our defense. Love became my shadow, making sure I ate, reminding me to breathe, cheering me on when the weight felt too much. But whispers started circling in town. Old friends crossed the street instead of meeting my eyes. At the grocery store, I overheard someone muttering, "Isn't she the one who stole that recipe?" My face burned, as though the lie itself had branded me. One evening, after a long day of legal prep, I sat alone on the porch, staring at the fading Ohio sunset. "Carter," I whispered into the wind, "if you were here, you'd know what to do. You'd make me laugh. You'd tell me this sauce isn't worth my soul. The silence that answered me was heavier than stone. The first court date came quickly. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and nerves. Reporters clustered outside, their cameras flashing as if I were some kind of criminal on trial for the world's amusement. Inside, Evelyn sat across from me in her cream suit, her smile sharp and smug. Paul sat at her side, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding mine. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. The case began. Evelyn's lawyers moved like wolves, circling with rehearsed confidence. They painted me as a bitter old woman desperate for attention, spinning lies about a recipe that was never mine. They even waved around the forged notebook, claiming it proved I was hiding the truth. When it was David's turn, he stood tall and steady. He presented Carter's real notebook, the grease stains and handwriting visible for all to see. He spoke of my years in the kitchen, the witnesses who had tasted the sauce at church events, the love that built the recipe from scratch. For a moment, hope flickered. But then Evelyn struck harder. Her team called Paul to the stand. My son, my flesh and blood. He walked slowly to the witness box, his face pale, his shoulders hunched. I prayed, "Please, Paul, remember who you are. Remember who raised you." He cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. "My wife's telling the truth," he said flatly. "The recipe wasn't my mother's alone. My father created it. My mother's exaggerating." The words sliced through me like knives. Love gasped audibly beside me. David muttered under his breath. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My son had just sworn under oath that I was a liar. Evelyn's smirk widened as Paul stepped down, his eyes never once meeting mine. And then, as if that betrayal wasn't enough, the judge announced that due to the seriousness of the claims, my finances would be frozen until the trial concluded. My checking account, my savings, even the deed to my house, all locked. The floor seemed to vanish beneath me. The room spun. Evelyn had taken my son. Now she had taken my freedom. And if she won this trial, she'd take every last piece of me. The courthouse steps felt heavier than mountains as love guided me down them. Reporters swarmed around us, shoving microphones in my face. "Mrs. Thompson, how does it feel knowing your own son testified against you? Do you regret pursuing this lawsuit now that your finances have been frozen? Isn't it true that you fabricated the recipe after your husband's death?" Each question was a dagger. Each flash of a camera a reminder that Evelyn's lies were spreading faster than I could breathe. Love snapped at them, her young voice trembling but fierce. "She's not a liar. My grandma is the kindest, most honest woman alive, and one day you're all going to see the truth." Her words silenced them for only a moment before the storm resumed. David pulled us into a waiting car, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. Back home, the silence was suffocating. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of unpaid bills. With my accounts frozen, I couldn't even buy groceries. Love had been paying for food out of her own meager savings, and the shame of it clawed at me. That night, as I lay awake, the memories came in waves. Paul as a boy, tugging at my apron strings, his little voice saying, "Mama, when I grow up, I'll take care of you." Now he sat in a courtroom, calling me a liar. My chest ached, but through the sorrow, something hardened inside me. Evelyn thought she had won. She thought she could strip me of dignity, of hope, of everything. But she didn't understand she couldn't steal the truth. The next morning, David came by. His suit looked wrinkled from lack of sleep. "Rose," he said, "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. We're cornered. Evelyn's narrative is strong. Paul's testimony hurt us badly, and the frozen accounts mean we can't bring in the expert witnesses I wanted. But if we give up now, she wins everything." "I won't give up," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can't. Not when Carter's name is at stake." David studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Then we need a miracle." Sometimes miracles don't fall from the sky. They hide in dusty corners, waiting for someone stubborn enough to dig. That afternoon, Love and I returned to the attic, desperate to find anything we might have missed. We opened old boxes, flipped through faded letters, sorted through stacks of yellowed papers. Hours passed. Dust clung to my skin, and my back ached from bending. I was ready to give up when Love's voice rang out. Grandma, look at this. She held up a small tin box wedged behind an old trunk. My heart leapt. I recognized it instantly. It was Carter's recipe trial box, the one he'd kept before I started the big notebook. We'd scribbled formulas on scraps of envelopes, receipts, even napkins, laughing as we tested them one by one. I thought it had been lost decades ago. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside, dozens of scraps tumbled out, each one stained, crinkled, but alive with Carter's handwriting. Some even had his little doodles, a smiley face, a sauce bottle, his initials signed with pride. Love gasped. Grandma, this proves everything. This shows the sauce started with you and Grandpa. Evelyn can't forge this. There are too many scraps, too much history. It's real. Tears blurred my eyes as I held a napkin covered in Carter's scrawl. Try more vinegar next time. Rose says it needs a kick. For a moment, I felt him with me again, laughing in the kitchen, his hand warm on mine. But then the sound of tires crunching on gravel snapped me back. Headlights beamed through the attic window. Love froze, her eyes wide. Grandma, she whispered, someone's here. I carefully tucked the tin box under my arm as footsteps echoed on the porch below. Then came the sound of a key turning in the lock. But I hadn't given anyone else a key. My blood ran cold. The sound of the key twisting in the lock made my heart slam against my ribs. Love gripped my arm, her whisper sharp with fear. Grandma, don't move. We crouched in the attic, every creak of the house magnified in the silence. The door downstairs opened with a groan, followed by heavy footsteps crossing the floor. I clutched Carter's tin box to my chest. Whoever was down there wasn't here for conversation. They were here for this. Love's eyes darted to the corner. A narrow ladder led down to the back hallway. I shook my head. Too risky, I mouthed. The footsteps grew louder, climbing the stairs. Then a voice. Familiar. Pained. Mom. It was Paul. My breath caught. For a moment, relief washed over me, until I remembered the courtroom, his cold testimony, his silence as Evelyn tried to ruin me. I didn't answer. Mom, I know you're here, he said, his voice breaking. Please let me explain. Love's eyes narrowed. She didn't trust him. Neither did I. But if he'd come this far, hiding wouldn't protect us. Stay behind me, I whispered to her. Then I stood, clutching the tin box like a shield, and descended the creaky attic stairs. Paul stood in the hallway, his shoulders slumped, his eyes rimmed red. For the first time in years, he looked less like Evelyn's puppet and more like the boy I had raised. Mom, he whispered. I didn't know she'd go this far. I thought it was just about money. Anger surged through me. You swore under oath that I was a liar. You let her drag my name through the mud. And now you show up here. Why? To finish what she started? He flinched as though I'd struck him. No, to stop her. Mom, the second recipe, it wasn't Evelyn's idea. It was mine. The floor seemed to drop from under me. You. My voice shook with fury. You forged another recipe? You tried to make me look like a fool. His eyes filled with tears. I thought it would end things. I thought if the board believed there was no way to prove the real recipe, they'd walk away and Evelyn would drop the fight. I didn't know she'd see you. I didn't know she'd freeze your accounts. Love stepped forward, her voice like fire. You nearly destroyed her. You let your greed blind you, and now you want pity. Paul hung his head. I'm sorry. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I couldn't let her come here tonight. She found out about the box. She's on her way, Mom. She's coming for it. Even as he spoke, headlights flashed through the window again. A car door slammed outside. Evelyn. Love grabbed the phone. I'm calling David. I shook my head. No time. We finish this now. The front door burst open and Evelyn stormed inside, her heels clicking like a judge's gavel. Her eyes locked on the tin box in my arms, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. Well, she sneered, look at that. The missing piece of the puzzle. Hand it over, Rose, and maybe I'll let you keep your little house. Paul stepped between us. Evelyn, stop. This has gone too far. She laughed, cold and cruel. You spineless coward. Do you really think anyone cares about your mother's old scraps of paper? With this box, I'll own everything. McDonald's will cut me the check, and you too can rot. I felt something ignite inside me, a fire I hadn't felt since Carter was alive. Slowly, deliberately, I opened the tin box and pulled out one of the stained scraps. Carter's handwriting danced across it, messy and full of life. You see this? I said, my voice steady. This isn't just a recipe. This is love. This is history. This is truth. And truth doesn't belong to thieves. Evelyn lunged forward, but Paul grabbed her arm. No, he snapped, his voice shaking. It's over. I won't let you hurt her anymore. For the first time, he chose me. The commotion drew neighbors to the porch, their shadows pressing against the windows. Love, quick as lightning, filmed everything on her phone. Evelyn's threats, her attempt to snatch the box, her venomous words about money. By the time David and the police arrived, the evidence was undeniable. Evelyn was arrested on charges of fraud, forgery, and intimidation. The lawsuit crumbled overnight. Weeks later, McDonald's executives returned to my home. Not with lawyers, but with respect. They offered me the deal Evelyn had tried to steal. $2 million, not just for the recipe, but for the story behind it. I didn't smile at the number. Money was just paper. What mattered was that Carter's legacy, our sauce, our laughter in that tiny Ohio kitchen, it was finally safe. Paul stood outside the day the check arrived, his hands in his pockets, his face etched with shame. Mom, he whispered, I don't expect forgiveness, but thank you for not letting her win. I looked at him for a long moment. My heart ached with both love and disappointment. Paul, I said softly, redemption isn't a word, it's a choice. If you want to make things right, prove it with your life. He nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. As for me, I held Carter's notebook and the tin box close, knowing Evelyn's shadow would never darken my door again. Sometimes revenge doesn't come with fire or fury. Sometimes it comes with the simple, undeniable strength of truth and the quiet satisfaction of watching your enemy fall into the very trap they dug for you. And that, my friends, is how a box of worthless recipes changed everything.